What is a battle shonen? I'm asking this because a lot of people like to talk about the term battle shonen as if it never existed, that shonen has always been a demographic and never a genre. Now, maybe that's the case in Japan, but at least here in the West, that's just not true. And it all goes back to Dragon Ball. So prior to Dragon Ball, darker, more mature manga were kind of the thing. Granted, Astro Boy was the first big manga, and there were also a lot of gag manga. So fast forward to the 80s, and it mainly comes down to like 2 or 3 choices. You can do a heavy manga that's for older readers and maybe even gets into politics. You could do a sports manga or like a racing manga, or you could do a gag manga. So enter Dragon Ball, which when it starts out is very clearly a gag series, or at the very least a comedy. I mean, everything that happens in early Dragon Ball is a meme. You have the whole thing with Goku not knowing what girls are, you have all the funny ways he beats bad guys, you have all the perverted jokes. While there is action, the focus is very clearly the comedy. But this changes as Dragon Ball continues and the plot gets more intense and we get closer to meeting Piccolo. At that point, we start to see some of the familiar conventions like training arcs and power-ups. So by the time we get to the World Tournament, Dragon Ball has gone through a change. While there are still elements of comedy, the focus of the story has shifted greatly in favor of the action. And that's what would set the stage for Dragon Ball Z and lead Western fans at least to come up with this convention of a battle shonen. Now I can't say for sure if that's where it comes from. I don't know if any one person invented it, but most people will agree that it started with Dragon Ball. Because Dragon Ball's the manga that was very popular and went from a comedy to an action series. And from there, we can kind of understand what people are talking about when they say battle shonen. Basically, it's any series that's a shonen, so a manga in a shonen magazine, targeted at middle school and high school kids, that has elements of both action and comedy. It's from this understanding that people are able to talk about battle shonen as its own genre. Now, what isn't a battle shonen? Well, for starters, it's gotta be a shonen, right? So obviously something like Berserk doesn't count because that's a seinen manga. I bring that up because people like to talk about seinen like it's naturally on a level above any shonen manga. But the only difference is the demographic. If Berserk were in Weekly Shonen Jump, then it wouldn't even be a discussion. Now on the flip side, we can say something like Blue Box isn't a battle shonen. It's in Jump and it's got the same demographic, but it's not an action series. Blue Box is a romance sports manga. So because it doesn't focus on the comedy or action aspects, we can't call it a battle shonen. But here's something a bit trickier. What about, say, One Punch Man? A lot of people might think it's a battle shonen. It's got all the same conventions. I mean, it starts out like a comedy and quickly focuses more on the action, just like Dragon Ball. But when you look into it, One Punch Man is not a shonen. It's a seinen manga. So while it's basically right there, we can't call it a battle shonen because of that demographic. And that's what gets us to Battle Shonen, a series with elements of action and comedy that is specifically targeted towards the shonen demographic. A series can share elements of the genre, but it has to meet those 3 requirements. Now even after that, people will say it's not a genre. They could point to something like One Punch Man and say it's just a demographic thing. But you also have to keep in mind that this genre has a lot of unique conventions that go back to Dragon Ball. Now before I explain what those are, make sure to like the video if you're enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. So we have those 3 things that make up the battle shonen genre, but there's also certain conventions that come to mind whenever we bring up a battle shonen. So for example, probably the biggest part of the genre are the protagonists. In fact, a lot of people will rate a series based on how the main character fits into certain conventions. So for example, if you go back to Goku, he could turn into a great ape. From there, we get series like Bleach, and more specifically Naruto, where the main character can turn into some kind of demon or monster. Following these 2 series, a lot of battle shonen have been inspired to write a character that has a similar transformation or ability. So right now, we have Jujutsu Kaisen. And before, Yuji's big thing was that he had a literal demon inside of him. You also have this in Black Clover with Asta, who literally has a demon inside of him and can turn into a demon. Now obviously this isn't unique to Battle Shonen, but it was a big thing in Dragon Ball and it was a huge part of Naruto. So since then, it's become one of the conventions that these kinds of stories have. And because of that, it's another thing that fans can talk about to discuss influence whenever they rate certain manga. There's a lot of other main character tropes that follow with protagonists in Battle Shonen series, but that's the first one that comes to mind. Another big convention that people talk a lot about in this genre are female characters. I mean, anytime there's a girl character that people like, someone will say, oh, she's my favorite female character in Shonen, or she's the best female character in this manga, instead of just saying character. And while there's a bunch of reasons for this outside of the manga context, one reason why this happens is because female characters generally don't get the best focus in a lot of these Battle Shonen. I mean, just look at Dragon Ball. All the Z fighters are dudes. All the villains are dudes. You can basically count all the important female characters on one hand. And it's even worse in Naruto. Sakura is one of the worst characters in that series. Every other line of dialogue she has is about Sasuke. She is completely irrelevant in the Sasuke retrieval arc. She does the cliche cutting her hair thing instead of actual character development. The same is true for a lot of the other female characters in Naruto. So for this reason, people will often separate female characters specifically because of how they've historically been portrayed in the genre. And that is why people talk about it like a genre. You look at fantasy and it has an evolution of conventions dating back to Lord of the Rings. Science fiction has a history of conventions dating back to Frankenstein and all of the older books. The same is true for Battle Shonen. While it may not have invented these things, it has its own unique history that dates back to Dragon Ball. And now we're at this point where whenever a new Battle Shonen comes out, the first thing people do is say, oh, this feels like Bleach, or oh, this feels like Naruto. It's because these older series influenced the genre so much that now the newer stories are taking it and giving them their own twist. And this is especially true in the case of Shonen Jump, where all these manga are in the same magazine. The creators are often assistants to the generation that came before them, and the people in the magazine are actively working together and influencing each other. You had Oda and Takei meeting up talking about One Piece and Shaman King back in the day, and today you have guys like Tabata and Horikoshi hanging out and talking about their manga. Now, this doesn't mean Battle Shonen live in their own world. Like we pointed out before, they share a lot with other manga. I mean, look at One Punch Man. It's very easy to confuse it for a Battle Shonen. I mean, everyone basically calls it a battle series, so if it wasn't for the demographic, it would be a Battle Shonen. It would fit in right at Jump. And then you have manga like Chainsaw Man that you're like, dude, this has to be a seinen. It's so graphic. But nope, it's a shonen. Plus, Battle Shonen share the same magazines as other manga. I mean, if you look at Jump, it's still got Battle Shonen, gag series, romance series, and sports series all in the same magazine. So it's easy to see how these different mangas share stuff in common too. So then the real question is, what's the point? Like, if people talk about Battle Shonen like it's so different, but it really shares a lot in common with other genres and even fits in those other genres, then why do people even bother to talk about it separately? The simple answer is the community. Battle Shonen fans love these manga and they respect the history of these manga. They recognize that the older manga changed the industry for the better and are still influencing the new stuff today. So in recognition of all that, they talk about these new manga in the context of the manga that came before them. And they use these conventions to specifically discuss the manga that have actually influenced them rather than any other old manga that happens to be in the same magazine or a series that just so happens to share something in common. Sure, some of the dorks out there take things too far and gatekeep, but that's not the point. The point of this isn't to place things in neat boxes and be like, well, this is my favorite seinen and this is my favorite Battle Shonen. No, the point is that there's history of a specific kind of shonen manga that people love. So whether fans use the term or not, Battle Shonen will always be a genre that influences readers and creators and holds a special place in the industry. But now I'd like to hear what you think. How would you define the Battle Shonen series? How would you define Battle Shonen? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like another discussion like this one, then check out my video on bad manga. In that video, I talk about how bad manga can ruin good anime adaptations. You can find that video in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.